What will the return of Donald Trump to the White House mean for the UK and our economy in 2025?
I'm a big believer in tariffs. I think tariffs are the most beautiful word. I think they're beautiful. It's going to make us rich.
Trade war, or could a trade deal with America be on the table? We hear the concerns of some farmers about that.
For British farming, a USA deal is unsurvivable. We cannot compete.
Someone who has advised Donald Trump tells us the British government has to choose between closer ties with the EU or the US.
I think it would be good for both countries, especially for British citizens, to move away from socialism. But that's a decision the British have to make themselves.
And we'll get the thoughts on all of this from the former British ambassador to Washington, Lord Darroch. But first, the BBC.
DEFRA have finally made a big admission in their food security report, which came out last week. They have accepted and confirmed that Brexit has had an impact on our food situation, on our food security. It's also acknowledged that food insecurity itself in the population has increased. And this is not surprising because Brexit in itself created inflation. The fact that we've also had extra inflation from the Ukraine war and COVID is another matter. We have had the inflation from Brexit, which a lot of economists refer to as being sticky. And the reason it's sticky is because Brexit is for keeps. Until you decide to give up on Brexit, you're stuck with this inflation because we put in trade barriers with our biggest market, and that increases the costs of doing trade with our biggest market. So, hey presto, that's why you've got inflation. Plus the other problems associated with loss of freedom of movement and the loss of labour source have also caused inflationary problems because there's been labour shortages, and so wages have gone up to fill those jobs. And also to get workers in now on visas, that's another cost for employers as well. So Brexit is without doubt an inflationary reality, and it's something that we're having to live with, as Adam Posen said, a bit like having arthritis, that it's causing us pain and problems for no benefits whatsoever. And so as a result, we are poorer. And that means that poorer people are finding it harder to afford good food. And that is why we have an increase in foodborne illnesses and those sorts of malnutrition type problems, because food is no longer as affordable as it was. And as we all know, we now have many food banks. These things didn't exist until we had the Conservative government, the coalition government, in 2010, when they really started to push out these food banks because of the cost of living becoming much, much harder. And Brexit really has compounded that problem, and it's continuing to do so. The Labour government, as we keep saying, are increasingly facing both ways in terms of hoping to get a better deal with Europe, but they're also now increasingly talking about getting an American trade deal. And I spoke to BBC Radio 4 The World this weekend.
3 weeks tomorrow, Donald Trump will be inaugurated for a second time as the President of the United States. So what will Trump's return to the White House mean for the world and for Britain in particular? Is it an economic threat? Trump has said he will impose tariffs. That's taxes on imports on all goods coming into America, including those from Britain. Or should we in Britain perhaps regard Trump's return as an economic opportunity? Trump's pick for his new trade representative has suggested that elusive US-UK trade deal should be a goal for Washington. But that brings economic and political challenges of its own, as we discovered the last time such a deal was being seriously examined during Trump's first term. Some farmers are still worried any such trade deal will include provisions for US farming produce to be imported to Britain. Liz Webster is the founder of Save British Farming. She's also a beef and arable farmer and sent us this message from her fields in Wiltshire.
It's hard to believe that once again we are examining the possibility of a USA trade deal. For British farming, a USA deal is unsurvivable. The way they farm in America is so different to the way we farm here. They have a lot more space, they have better weather, and they have lower regulations, which means that we cannot compete. And once those imports start coming in here, it will just be the straw that breaks the camel's back. The British public are largely unaware of the huge differences in how we farm. Polling shows time and time again that British people don't want to see a drop in food, animal welfare and environmental standards. There's nothing good about an America trade deal, and it will see us having to do as Trump orders because he'll be able to hold us to ransom for food. I will put a clip in the link below to the entire show so you can listen to it all. But I'm going to play you the clip from Lord Darroch, who was the American ambassador when Trump was last in office and Theresa May was Prime Minister. So he was there as we tried to do the America deal last time. And his contribution really validates my values around what should be done. This whole madness of giving up free trade with the biggest market on our doorstep, which 90% of our agricultural goods are imported to, and most of the stuff that we buy for agriculture comes from Europe as well, including our electricity and gas and all the commodities. It is absolutely insane to cut off trade with our biggest market, particularly for goods, to get a deal with America.
To that was Kim Darroch, Lord Darroch, the former British ambassador to the United States who worked with Donald Trump during the president's first term. Good afternoon to you, Lord Darroch.
Good afternoon.
Can we start by you telling us just how challenging you think it will be for the UK government to deal with a second Trump administration from next month?
Ben, Trump is nothing if not unpredictable. So who knows whether he's going to carry through on all of those policies he spelt out during the election campaign. I personally think he will with most of them, and these will cause problems for the UK. But we're heading into the unknown here. And let's see, what you can say with some certainty is it's going to be a roller coaster ride. There'll be these 5 a.m. tweets that occasionally will make big news in the UK. There are some strikingly unusual appointments amongst his cabinet ministers and amongst his envoys. So it's going to be a challenge.
And do you anticipate that it will be more challenging this time, that your successor, Peter Mandelson, will have a more difficult time than you had?
Well, I don't remember it being particularly quiet or easy while I was there. But the difference this time is that with his first term, Donald Trump came in never having held any public office and not knowing, to be frank, a lot of people, including in the Republican Party. And so a lot of his cabinet appointees in his first term were Republican mainstreamers who, one by one, fell out with him. And so by 2 years into his administration, most of them had been fired. But he was held back by a number of these people who are advocating more traditional Republican policies. This time, you're going to see Trump unleashed with a cabinet of supporters, cheerleaders, enablers. And in his own mind, this is his last chance to achieve all of those policy objectives that he's held not just for the last 8-10 years, but for 3 or 4 decades. So I think you will see Trump with new purpose and with a team of supporters and enablers behind him.
Yes. Well, let's talk about what the UK government's policy objectives should be when it comes to this new administration. Do you think it's sensible for them to be pushing for a US-UK trade deal, or should they set their sights a bit lower? Should they simply try to avoid being hit by US tariffs? What would you be advising?
I was around when negotiations happened between 2017 and 2019 on a UK-US trade deal. And top of the US list of objectives then was more or less unrestricted access for US agriculture. And you've heard from spokesmen already on the programme, and I think their positions are justified, just how damaging that would be to the UK industry. It's not just about chlorine-washed chicken or hormone-treated beef. It is the whole unregulated style of the US agricultural sector and its comparatively low environmental safety and welfare standards compared to British agriculture. So British agriculture can't compete. So I wouldn't be an enthusiast for a UK-US free trade deal that covers the waterfront. But I do think Peter Mandelson is right to talk about the options for doing a smaller trade deal in areas like digital trade or military equipment or that kind of thing, where I think there is real potential.
You'll have heard Keir Starmer's view that one can effectively ride both horses, i.e. get better relations with the EU, better economic ties with the EU and also the US at the same time. Do you think that position is realistic? Or, as some argue, Britain is inevitably going to have to choose between the EU and the US?
I think any politician, any Prime Minister of the UK would want to be able to have his cake and eat it, to have good relations with both. But it kind of depends how fast and how completely Trump pursues, for example, his policies on tariffs, and whether the British government is at all attracted by any kind of free trade deal. Stephen Moore, who you heard a few minutes ago, is hinting at one of the likely US demands, which is about regulation, about the UK basically shifting from a regulatory model here that's more or less derived from our membership of the EU to being more in line with US regulatory rules and standards. And, you do have to make that choice. And I think it's an easy choice because we do, as you said, half of our trade with the EU, not with the US. But, for example, when Nigel Farage talks about the benefits of the trade deal with the US, part of that agenda, shared by the Brexit contingent in the Conservative Party, is to actually switch from the EU model to the US model. So there is a question there, and there is a choice that has to be made.
And when you say an easy choice, would you say that economics dictates that we should be closer to Europe then?
Yeah, I mean, the frustrating thing for people like me, man, is the world's largest we are free traders. We have been for generations. The world's largest free market is on our doorstep, 22 miles across the English Channel, and we chose to leave it. And that's extraordinarily frustrating. It's even more frustrating that this government, despite wanting a reset with the EU, seems uninterested in getting significantly closer to the single market in terms of, there aren't halfway houses here. Either you're part of the single market or you're not. And it seems we're not going to be, at least for this electoral term.
Yes.
So I think it's a clear and obvious choice here. But I'm not Prime Minister.
Well, indeed, and others will have other views about where our priorities should lie. Finally, have you got any advice for Peter Mandelson? Would you, for instance, advise him to be less direct in his diplomatic cables back home, given your own experience when your cables were leaked and then Trump said he wouldn't deal with you after that?
Yeah. I mean, I doubt whether Peter will be putting a lot of stuff on paper, because he has the advantage as a senior politician and a senior figure in the Labour Party. He can pick up the phone to the Prime Minister when he has views to put across. I mean, my 2 words.
OK, we are going to have to leave that there. But thank you very much, Lord Darroch, for talking us through that. I'm Ben Chew, and that's The World This Weekend.
A better deal with America might help some sectors, but it's particularly bad for goods and food. And if you do a trade deal with America, despite all of these promises of being able to have a pick and mix, it will not work like that because of the structure of the American food system. It is monopolized. It's got a handful of big corporations who run everything. And the foods that they export are heavily processed. They're full of preservatives, obviously, because America is highly geared to exporting food. And that means that food is incredibly bad for you because it's full of sugar and salt and chemicals. And that is why they have a problem with obesity in America. And that is why also many countries in the world have a ban on American food because they don't want to let their population suffer with poisonous food. So I cannot understand why Keir Starmer would decide to try and get an American trade deal with Peter Mandelson using Nigel Farage as a conduit. We know from polling that only 17% support doing a deal with America. But 68% in polls recently think that we should have a closer alignment with Europe, including freedom of movement. Why is Keir Starmer choosing the most narrow, difficult path which doesn't have the democratic support? I know it has the support of, big business people like Rupert Murdoch and obviously Elon Musk, who's not even British. But to force through a trade deal which destroys our food security, our healthy food system, to deliver being reliant on food imports from the United States is surely the most mad thing to do because it will please nobody. For years afterwards, we will be blaming the Labour government for forcing us to eat American food. And then we'll also have to deal with the offensive on our national health system. We went through this 5 years ago when Boris Johnson was Prime Minister and everybody was repulsed at the thought of an American trade deal. Indeed, when Theresa May was Prime Minister, we had Trump here on a state visit, looking as though he wanted to become, a sort of permanent resident in Buckingham Palace. Why would we want to subject ourselves to this reality? Britain has to make a choice. It's got three choices. It either goes to America, or it becomes part of China, or it stays in Europe. We're geographically located in Europe. We have the similar standards, the same standards as Europe. We have the same values, shared history, shared gene pool. We are European. So it makes no sense that we are facing outwards to do this. Mandelson has said that he hopes that we can take Europe with us. Why would Europe want to follow us into do a disastrous trade deal with the United States? It just isn't going to happen unless there is a cataclysmic event like a nuclear explosion or war of some sort which contaminates food in Europe. Then it would make sense to be importing all your food from the other side of the Atlantic. That is the only conditions in which I think Europe would concede to such a reality. And dear me, I really hope that that doesn't happen.